Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. So we've been talking about the Community Investment Plan and the Community Survey that was presented in meetings. And in a Wichita City press release presenting a summary of the survey findings, Mayor Carl Brewer was quoted thusly. He said, "Now it's up to us as elected leaders to do what our citizens did. Put politics and special interests aside and focus on what our citizens have said." You see, the mayor believes there is a small group of people. He calls them the no's or the naysayers, a small group that's opposed to progress. Well, opposed, that is, to what the mayor considers progress. He believes that by opposing government intervention in the local economy, well, that's the same as being opposed to progress. He and others believe that it is their duty to create jobs in Wichita, and that without their efforts, few jobs would be created in Wichita. But what is the record of progress in Wichita under the mayor's leadership? Well, I've shown you the charts of Wichita job growth relative to its peer cities. It's not good. Although two cities that Wichita has done better than are Wichita Falls, Texas, and Springfield, Illinois. It might surprise you then to learn that Wichita's economic development agencies recently hired people from these two cities to manage our economic development. But in a recent op-ed in the Wichita Eagle, Mayor Brewer wrote, "The economic future for Wichita is promising. We weathered the recession and are seeing renewed economic growth." Well, the statistics don't agree with what the mayor said. Just look at the chart I showed. And here's something else. In 2013, our economic development officials are taking credit for creating 1,117 jobs. Does that sound like a lot? Well, the civilian labor force for just the city of Wichita is about 295,000. So these jobs that we take credit for are barely over 1/3 of 1% of these people. And when we realize that at least some of these jobs would have been created without the involvement of the economic development bureaucrats, well, we have to wonder just what is the source of the mayor's optimism. I really don't think that all of our city leaders have been willing to acknowledge these statistics. When I presented them to the Wichita City Council last year, I was met with resistance. But I think that at least some of our leaders are coming around. Recently, the Wichita Eagle reported, "Jobs create the wealth in the community, and we are at the bottom." Well, that's quoting Susie Alstron, who works for the Wichita Metro Chamber of Commerce. She also said, "It takes an awful lot of energy to pull it back up. We've got to get on it." And the Wichita Eagle reported her as saying, "If the city does not grow jobs, it could start to shrink," she said, and I think we're at that tipping point, Susie Alstron added. Well, the remainder of that Wichita Eagle article wasn't very optimistic. It quoted Jeremy Hill from the Center for Economic Development and Business Research at Wichita State University as saying, "Only modest improvement in the job situation is forecast for 2014, and industry analysts project growth in the business jet market will resume this year after bottoming out in 2013. But Jeremy Hill, which we mentioned a moment ago, forecasts that total non-farm employment will increase by only 2,683 jobs in 2014. That's a growth rate of 0.9%. And although that's almost double the growth rate of 2013, those numbers have been revised downward from his earlier projections in October when he forecasted a 1.2% increase. Hill said, "We are growing faster than 2013, but not nearly as fast as Kansas or the United States. The U.S. is growing to 1.8%, so we're at half of that rate." Yeah, Wichita grows at half the rate of the country as a whole. So what's been the problem in Wichita? It's probably impossible to say for sure, but I have a few ideas. Here's one. When I presented the poor job growth statistics to the City Council last year, Council member James Clendenin excused Wichita's poor job growth by noting our dependence on manufacturing, especially aviation. And that sector has not done well in recent years, there's no doubt about that. But we've known for decades that aviation is highly cyclical, with lots of ups and downs, and that Wichita is highly concentrated in this industrial area. For all this time, our city leaders have told us that we must diversify our economy. And just now, our city leaders are starting to talk about entrepreneurship as a way to generate economic growth in Wichita. But last year, the city awarded a large economic development incentive to Spirit AeroSystem. That's our city's largest employer in its most concentrated industry. That works against diversification and increases concentration. And we also regularly give large incentives to our other aircraft manufacturers, too. We need to recognize that these economic development incentives have a cost, and someone has to pay. And who is it that pays? Well, that would be the unseen companies across the city, the companies that we need to rely on for a diversified economy. Now, the city uses benefit cost studies that purport to show that government actually gains by granting these economic development incentives. But do we really believe this? If we really believe that incentives like this are profitable for the city, and if we really believe that these incentives create jobs and prosperity, I might wonder why we grant incentives so infrequently. Or why is there the need for a public hearing if these incentives are so good for the economy? Why is there any controversy? And more important is this: why can't everyone have incentives like this? Think of the job creation that would unleash. Well, a second idea as to why Wichita may be performing poorly is cronyism and rampant cronyism. Here's just one example. In 2008, the Wichita City Council approved a no and low-interest loan to movie theater owner Bill Warren and his partners. The Wichita Eagle said that this loan could cost taxpayers as much as $1.2 million. And that loan was to prop up an earlier investment taxpayers had made a few years earlier that benefited Warren and his partners. But that investment was failing, and city leaders told us we needed to bail out Bill Warren and his partners. City council members at the time said this was a wise investment and necessary to protect taxpayers from loss. And Warren's theaters have received other financial benefit from the city under Brewer's leadership too. And then, and I'm not making this up, when Brewer started manufacturing and selling barbecue sauce, it was sold at Warren's movie theaters. Really, that happened. Now, we have city code in Wichita that says council members shall refrain from making decisions involving friends and business associates. So here we have the mayor of Wichita voting to give financial benefits to a man, and then the mayor sells his wares at that man's business, and then the mayor continues to vote to give financial benefits to that man. That seems to be in violation of that statute. Well, we have a city attorney that says that law doesn't really mean what it seems to say in plain English. But people recognize cronyism and wrongdoing when they see it, and what the mayor and other city council members do is wrong. Well, here's another example. A few years ago, Key Construction proposed a no-bid contract to build a city-owned parking garage, and the city council voted in favor of that, all except Michael O'Donnell, I should add. But the city later decided to put the contract out for competitive bid. Well, Key Construction won the bid. Its winning bid was about $4.7 million. And here's what's important to know. In its first bid, which the mayor and city council approved under the city council's no-bid contract system, well, that bid was for $6 million. So the no-bid contract awarded to Key Construction was cronyism in the extreme. If the desire of the majority of the city council, including Mayor Carl Brewer, had been realized, Wichita taxpayers would have sent an extra and unnecessary $1.3 million to a politically connected construction company. Well, why was this an example of cronyism? Key Construction, well, that is, its executives and their spouses, contribute heavily to Wichita City Council members' political campaigns, and the mayor is a fishing buddy with the company's chief executive. Evidently no one, at least no one in charge, thinks this is wrong, that the mayor votes to grant overpriced no-bid contracts to his fishing buddy, and that city council members do the same for their significant campaign contributors. Well, then there's Dave Burke. He's received many millions from many levels of governments, but still thinks he doesn't get enough. That's what we conclude from his appeal of a property tax assessment in a TIF district. Those taxes, those property taxes, even though they are routed back to him for his own benefit, were still too high for his taste, and he appealed them and got his taxes reduced. The Wichita Eagle reported at the time, Downtown Wichita's leading developer, Dave Burke, represented himself as an agent of the city, without the city's knowledge or consent, to cut his taxes on publicly owned property he leases in the Old Town Cinema Plaza. Well, a number of Wichita officials were not pleased with this act of Dave Burke. According to the Wichita Eagle reporting, Burke was not authorized to do what he did. The Wichita Eagle reported, officials in the city legal department said that while Burke was in his rights to appeal taxes, he did not have authorization to file an appeal on the city-owned parking and retail space he leases. As for Burke signing documents as the city's representative, well, the city attorney Gary Riebensdorf said, "I do have a problem with that." Well, evidently city officials were not too upset by Burke's actions. He's received other benefits from the city council since this action. No one on the city council, not one city bureaucrat, would stand up and say, "This is not right." Dave Burke abused his relationship with the city last time around. Let's find someone else to partner with. Well, you also remember that last summer, 2 development teams competed for a city contract to build apartments on the west bank of the Arkansas River. One team had as its members, David Wells, Bill Warren, and Dave Burke, who we've just been talking about. And this team's application featured a number of elected officials as character references. The people listed included Wichita City Manager Robert Layton, the Mayor Carl Brewer, Wichita City Council Member Jeff Longwell, Wichita City Council member and now Vice Mayor Pete Meitzner, Kansas Governor Sam Brownback, and even our United States Congressman Mike Pompeo. Well, none of these officials I listed above, none of them gave permission for their names to be used in this way as character references. I know that because we asked them. Furthermore, none of these officials were contacted by the evaluation committee whose job it was to vet these potential city partners. We asked them too. Well, first of all, a few questions. First, do you think it's appropriate for the city manager and mayor to be listed as a character reference, given that anyone who reads that document would take that as an endorsement? Well, no, of course it's not appropriate. And here's a related question. Do you think it's appropriate for the city manager and mayor to endorse one of the applicants? Well, we don't know if the presence of these names implied an endorsement because the developers did not ask the city manager or mayor if they could be listed as references. We asked, and we asked for the other names I mentioned too.
You're watching Wichita Liberty TV.
And furthermore, the committee that evaluated the development teams did not call the city manager to inquire about the developers. We asked about this too. But making inquiries of references, isn't that what you would expect an evaluation committee to do? But we know that the evaluation committee did not contact even one of these officials that were listed as references. These applicants likely knew that the evaluation committee would not contact the references. Therefore, they freely listed these government officials. Which makes us wonder, what is the point of even having an evaluation committee? Even further, is it appropriate for the city to partner with people who think it's proper to list the city manager as a reference without asking if that was permissible? We can only imagine that these people, Wells, Burke, and Warren, they knew that the manager would not be contacted. And that goes for the other officials listed too, the mayor, governor, our UN's congressman, and district attorney. In light of this, numerous government officials listed as references without their permission or knowledge, an evaluation committee that never contacted these officials, and the information that these references could have provided. Do you think the evaluation committee fulfilled its duty to perform due diligence on behalf of the interests of the people of Wichita? Here's something else. The mayor also said that it's only a small group of people who make the allegations of cronyism. Well, that's probably true, and I think that points to a problem. If the mayor thinks there's no cronyism going on in Wichita, and if city council members generally agree with that, and if city hall bureaucrats agree, then these people are very isolated. The mayor and council members are surrounded by people who work for them. That would be people like the city manager and the economic development staff. And based upon my observation, these bureaucrats don't seem to be giving very good advice to the mayor and the city council. Then, of course, there are the cronies, the crony capitalists themselves. These are the people who want something from the city, like the applicants to develop the apartment on the west bank of the river. Do you think that they will be honest with the mayor and council members and advise them of the harm of cronyism? Not likely, I'd say, because they profit from this symbiotic relationship. But when the people of Wichita are given an example to vote on a specific instance of an economic development incentive that many view as cronyism, the people voted it down. That was the case with the overturn of an ordinance 2 years ago granting special tax treatment to the Ambassador Hotel in downtown Wichita. Remember, Mayor Brewer said we need to put politics and special interests aside. Well, if we could do that, it would be so good for our community. But I don't believe that the mayor and most city council members believe that the events I've cataloged above constitute politics, whatever that means, or catering to special interests. You know, there once was a day when newspaper editorial pages would crusade against the type of petty corruption that passes for business as usual in Wichita. But the editorial board of our newspaper, the Wichita Eagle, does not do this. Well, the mayor also recently wrote, "Community engagement is a permanent thing in Wichita now." Well, let's hope this actually happens, that we have community engagement instead of catering to cronies for the good of our city. Well, thank you for watching this episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Lee.